Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little. This video is a preview of one of my exclusive courses where I go deep on a specific topic to help my students take their game to the next level. I let my students request in-depth topics that they want me to cover, so I make a point to do that. Whatever they ask me to make for them, I do research, I do my diligence, and then I produce excellent content around that helps my students take their game to the next level. If you want to get this course you're about to watch or many of my other courses at 80% off or more, check out pokercoaching.com/holiday sale. Let's get to the video. Raphael asks, do you find that the low stakes players give up a lot of value by overbetting like this? Well, I don't really think this is that big of an overbet. I raised to 3.5 big blinds. He jammed for 30. You're going to find that anytime you are betting roughly 10 times your opponent's raise size or less, usually that's a relatively good size to give you some fold equity. I mean, so if you went all in for something like 100, then yeah, that would be giving up some value. Actually, with 10s, it'd definitely be giving up value because whenever he gets called, he's going to be in very bad shape. I suppose in this scenario, against a random guy early in my session, I probably would call for something like 80 with ace-king. And if he started shoving more than 80, I'd probably just fold and recognize I'm going to find a better spot later. Or, it's not necessarily that this is a bad spot to call. It's more of, if this guy's jamming for this much, he's probably going to open himself up to making errors later. And if he's doing this a lot, I'll quickly gather that information and then start calling off with stuff like ace-jack and pocket sevens and whatnot. So I'd probably fold early in session to a $100 all-in. But $80 less, I'm pretty much always calling ace-king. All right, next hand, king-jack offsuit, fourth position. So they fold to me, I raise to 7, button and the big blind both call. So I guess I'm not really listing the specific player types, and that's because I remember at this first table, pretty much everyone was tight and passive. They were tight and passive when they did not have a good hand, very, very aggressive when they actually had a good hand. So I'm not listing the player types, but recognize that most of the players were your traditional 50 to 70-year-old guy who was there. It seemed like they were all just trying to pass time. And no one really wanted to play a huge pot without a good hand. But whenever they had a good hand, they would very quickly start blasting their stack in there. Dave says, should you try to get on a different table to find more passive players? I actually think it's much more profitable to play against blatantly crazy players. So you really do want, I think the ideal table would have one very aggressive player and a lot of very passive players. That way you could get involved in spots to play big pots versus the crazy guy while still not getting forced off those spots by other aggressive players. But, every time I played at the 1-2 tables, they were soft. I would if this was a 5-10 game, I would never get up and leave. Or if this was a 25-50 game, I would just park there and play infinite hour sessions. So all the tables were good. But if your table is bad because people are playing well, and I guess we should quantify what playing well is. Playing well is whenever your opponents are clearly bluffing you sometimes, you cannot figure out when this is, and they are not making too many errors. Playing well is not playing a tight passive strategy when you don't have anything. And that's what most of these players were doing. All right, so anyways, king-jack, I raise to 7, button, and big blind call. I mentioned min-raising might be better a second ago, but I don't think I fully explained it. Min-raising might be better because you will induce your opponents to call with a much wider range of junk, and then they're probably not going to know how to play that junk after the flop. So that's why min-raising could be better, especially if you think you play better after the flop than most of your opponents, because they will ideally be making more errors than you do. Of course, you need to be very good at playing after the flop in order to justify min-raising. But I know in online poker, if you pay attention to the high-stakes games, a lot of the best players are min-raising their entire range. And if the best players are min-raising, there's probably something to it. I actually I wrote an article a while back from Card Player discussing, I think it was for Card Player, saying should you be raising to three big blinds like you traditionally do, or raising to something like 5 big blinds or 8 big blinds like everyone else at your table? Because that's what they're doing. It must be right? And the answer is no. You have to realize your opponents are stuck at 1-2 for a reason. They are making such large errors on a regular basis that they cannot get together a bankroll to move up. And I think one of the errors where they are starting right off the bat is by raising bigger than normal. And that's a pretty easy leak to fix. So instead of raising to $12 pre-flop, try raising to $6 or $7 or something like that. Donald says you played live a few times and people look at you like a fish when you raise to 3 big blinds. You can only imagine what they'll think if you raise to $4 pre-flop. Yeah, well, luckily what your opponents think about you does not matter. Yeah, a lot of the people in these games, they think what they are doing is right, but at the same time, they don't look at their situation and realize I'm playing 1-2 and I'm not moving up, therefore I must be doing something wrong. A lot of people don't like to accept the fact that they are doing things that are blatantly incorrect, and the easiest way to find out what you're doing wrong is to look at the players who are better than you and try to model your game after them. And I think raising smaller could be ideal. I didn't have enough time to experiment with it, but I probably should have, but I did not do it. I was trying to get together sort of like a default, like this is how I would traditionally play if I was to be sitting in these games. So anyways, I raise to 7, button calls, big blind calls, flop comes queen 9-4. I have a gut shot plus overcard. So I bet 14, only the big blind calls. If the button called, I think I'm probably done with this hand because I'm going to be out of position. But when the big blind calls, first off, if the button calls, his range is going to be stronger than when the big blind calls because the button has to act before the big blind facing this bet. So he has to have something to call, something reasonably good. Whereas once the button folds, now it's just me and the big blind in the pot. And now the big blind is effectively heads up, so he can call in a scenario where he knows he's closing the action and he's not going to get bluffed off of his hand. So I think he's going to have a lot of queens, a lot of 9s, a lot of 4s, and a lot of various gut shots. So when the turn's a 6, he checks. I probably got the vibe that his range was somewhat weak, and I bet 32 and he folded. And I found that a lot of the players, when you apply somewhat significant pressure, they are willing to fold stuff like middle pair and worse. It's not like they're just blindly calling you down with any trash. They are not folding top pair, and this is a good example of a spot where I am only betting twice. So if my opponent did call, I'm definitely not betting again. So earlier I said it was a mandatory 3-barrel spot. Even if something like, I mean, I guess if an ace came on the river, I'd probably bet. But if any other card comes on the river, I'm not betting. Even if a king comes on the river, I'm not going to value bet the king. I'm just going to check and go from there because the king is actually somewhat likely for my opponent to have jack 10 or king queen or something like that. Interestingly enough, I actually have the best draw in this scenario. So if the river is a blank and he checks and I check, I beat all the draws with king jack. So that's kind of a cool thing to do with king jack. If I had something like 10-8 instead, I would still bet the turn. But in that scenario, I would be a little bit more inclined to bet the river because then I lose to all the busted draws. So that's always a little something you want to keep in mind. And if I did have 10-8 in this scenario, I would have bet the flop, I think. Maybe I wouldn't, but maybe I would have. If I did bet the flop, I would definitely bet again on the turn when I get the double gut shot. Felipe said he just got here. What was the standard preflop raise in this table? So this is something also that I didn't really observe. I don't think there was a quote-unquote standard raise. I mean, if I had to say what its standard was, it was probably $7. I think that was about standard, although some people were raising to 10. But you have to realize, if your opponents are raising to 10, that does not mean you have to raise to 10. Or if they're raising to 100, you do not have to raise to 100. You need to play your good strategy. Do not think that what your opponents are doing should change your good strategy. I actually remember hearing someone say this a long time ago in a very bad poker book. And maybe there was some merit to this, but they say, I like to raise to something like 7 big blinds in the first hand of a tournament to set the stage for what the standard preflop raise size is. So they thought that by raising the 7 big blinds, their opponents would all raise the 7 big blinds because that's what we're doing today. And that's just completely asinine. But if it works, maybe it does. I mean, maybe there's some merit to getting your opponents to raise the 7 big blinds. But do not think that what your opponents are doing should affect your play at all. But at this table, most of the people were raising between 6 and 10. There were very few people who were just blasting it for no good reason. And we talked about this earlier. If someone is blasting it to $20 pre-flop, just play tight. You don't have to do anything. That makes the game as easy as it could possibly be when they're raising huge. Dave says, how often did you find they were check raising there to trap? Sometimes, I guess. I mean, I didn't really witness it too often. I think most of the people who had a queen in this scenario, a queen or better, were check raising the flop. And that did happen sometimes, although I tended to not. I don't think I reported too many of those hands. I guess we'll see as we go. But like, say I did bet this flop with king jack and I got check raised, I would just fold. There's nothing to there's nothing to see here. You get check raised, you fold, and then you move on. So yeah, in that spot I would have lost 21 and we would have kept playing. All right, jack 8 of diamonds, hijack seat. I raised to 7, small blind, a big blind call. So notice that there are spots where people are not limping every hand. At least they weren't at this table. There were definitely a lot of pots where there were limps, but at the same time, there were spots where it folds around to me in the hijack seat. You will find also that if you show that you can raise the limpers, as we did earlier, that will sometimes make your opponents tighten up versus you to the point where they stop limping all their trash and then they just fold around to you. And of course, you'd rather your opponents be limping with all their trash, but if they fold around to you as well, that's not the end of the world. All right, so I raised to 7, small blind and big blind call. Flop comes 10-9-3. I have jack 8 of diamonds. Small blind leads for 7, big blind folds, and I call. So this is an interesting spot because when your opponents lead into you, it's typically very weak. And I think that's generally well known. When your opponents are betting small, it's almost always some marginal made hand, like 9-5 or 10-2 or something like that. And they're betting because they don't want to check and they don't want you to bet big. So I could have raised on the flop, but whenever your opponent's betting so small, they're giving you a great price to draw to the nuts, you should usually take that, especially if you think you'll be able to bluff your opponent later. And this is a very good spot for that. If my opponent... Okay, so anyways, I decided to call for that reason, mainly because I was getting great odds, and I was looking to see what develops. I'm definitely trying to make a play at this flop, at the pot, if the turn is not good for me. And if the turn is good for me, I'm just going to continue calling to keep my opponent in with his hand that's now drawing dead. So I call. Turn is a 4, so bad for me. Opponent bets 7 again. When you see this line where opponent bets small on the flop and then same bet size or another reasonably small bet like $10 on the turn, this is almost always a very weak play. I saw this happen quite a bit, and it was just blatantly obvious this was a weak hand. So I raised to 36. You want to be raising to an amount that will give you some fold equity. You don't want to raise to 18 or something like that, because then your opponent may call with their 10-2 or their 9-5 or whatever they have, and that's obviously not what I want. I want my opponent to fold. You could perhaps take this a step further and say, maybe I want to make it $20 on the flop, on the turn, and then on the river my opponent checks, then I just blast it for like 80 or 70 or something like that. There is a little bit of merit to that, because then you get more money into the pot, and you get to see if you get your draw, so that then you could value bet the river. But I think you probably just want to raise turn fairly big, and then if your opponent calls, you probably want to be done with it unless the river is an ace, a king, an 8, or a 7. So ace and king, I'll be bluffing river, and the other ones give me the nuts. If the river's a jack, I'll just check. If the river's an 8, I'll probably just check, because at that point I don't think my opponent is going to call. So there are a lot of spots in these hands where you are trying to apply maximum pressure in one spot to your opponent. Either you're trying to apply marginal pressure, a lot of pressure, or marginal pressure, then a lot of pressure, and then be done with it. And this is a spot where this is the point in the hand where I am applying maximum pressure. And if my opponent stays in the pot past this point, I'm going to tend to assume he has something very good. He could be in here with a draw. Like, say he does have queen jack, he may call the raise, and then I'm going to lose on the river when it checks. So that's a little bit unfortunate. I do beat the worst draws, mainly 8-7, but I'm not going to be bluffing on this river. So this is a spot where I decided to apply maximum pressure on the turn. I could have also called turn, but if you call the turn and the opponent then bets the river again, like say the river is whatever, another 4, and he bets $7, then if I raise, my opponent knows that he's not going to face an additional bet because the hand's over. So I think you will get hero called in that spot way more often than if you raise the turn. So I think raising the turn discourages hero calls. Dave says, were you showing these bluffs? Absolutely not. Did they catch on to your aggressive game as the session went on? Yeah, people started realizing like, oh, this is the guy who's going to be applying pressure to us. And I was definitely not playing the same strategy as everyone else at the table. I thought I was playing good, and I thought my opponents were playing bad, is what it amounts to. I was playing an aggressive game, and like an intelligent aggressive game. It's not like I'm just blindly aggressive. You see all these hands so far. I think all these have been reasonable. So, no, I was definitely not showing the bluff. So the last thing you want to do when you're bluffing is let your opponents know you're bluffing. And I just sat there, mucked the cards, act like I had a good hand, and moved on. Donald asked, did people recognize me? I think throughout the entire session, the entire 15 hours, I think only one guy noticed me, and he did not really say or do anything about it. He just kind of looked at me funny and was looking at me throughout the thing. I think maybe he recognized but did not know. One guy was actually reading a Card Player magazine that had one of my articles in it, so that was funny, but I don't think he noticed either. It seemed like everyone was really just in their own little world where they were a lot of them were just aggravated at not winning enough hands in their minds. And, I mean, we'll be talking about that a little bit later in common flaws that I saw in the players' games. Andrew says, so what is his thought process betting 7 on the turn? Is it possible value or just bad? Well, so, I mean, it's clearly just bad if you're going to fold to a raise because the good players are going to raise you every time. But what this guy he probably had a week 10 or a week 9. I would say with a high degree of certainty it was a week 10 or a week 9. And he was just betting because he didn't want to check and face a big bet. And he assumed that if I raised, I must have a good hand. And so I decided to raise and let him know that I clearly have a good hand and get him to fold. But yeah, this is a line a lot of the weaker players would take. They're betting small because they don't want to put a lot of money in the pot. Okay, so Samuel says, I talked about the bluff lines. Can I explain again? Well, really what I was saying is you very rarely want to take a bluff line where you're just blasting it on all 3 streets. You want to apply maximum pressure at some point throughout the hand if you are bluffing. And usually you want to do it when your opponent is at his weakest. And you can also represent additional bluffs in the future. So this is a pretty good example of that where I could have raised the flop, and I think that would have been fine. But notice that if my opponent does have a 10 or a 9, he may not fold. So now I'm stuck betting the turn again, also a very large bet. Because say I raised to 24 on the flop and he calls, turn I have to bet something like 50, and now I'm all of a sudden risking my stack. Whereas here, notice I only put like $50 into this pot, and I think I'm going to win it something like 80% of the time on the turn, because if my opponent does have a 10 or a 9, it certainly shrinks up. And he has to face another bet on the river. Andrew says, let's say instead of betting 7, he bet 22 on the turn. What would my move be then? At that point, I would just call, because then that is a significantly stronger line, because he's ramping up his betting as if he's clearly trying to put money into the pot. And yeah, so that's the spot where I would call with the effective nut draw. It's not really the nut draw, but it's close enough. And I would usually just fold to a river bet. So I'd play it pretty straightforward, getting reasonable odds on the turn, plus implied odds. Donald said, how would I play a hand like 8, 7, 6s, 5, 4s, 3s, 2s in the spot, knowing that range? Whenever he leads into me on the flop, I think I would have played it exactly the same, actually, because I do think that he has that marginal hand, and the plan is to take him off of it. Either you need to call the flop and then bluff the turn, and you are bluffing with those hands, or you need to just fold on the flop. Either of those are fine. Robert said, does my opponent have a similar stack? Yeah, this guy had a similar stack. I actually think the stacks at my table were probably deeper than the average 1-2 game, and I think that's because they allow you to buy in for 300 at 1-2 at Borgata, and I think that most of the players felt like they were buying in short, quote unquote short, for something like 150 or 200, even though that's still pretty deep. Jarrett said that in his experience, that whenever the board doesn't pair and the turn bet's the same as the flop bet, like this exact line, and he said it's almost always an invitation to steal. And yeah, it is. So I took it. And then Dave said, can we assume that the weaker players' bet sizes are usually indicative of their hand value? And I think that is the case to some extent against some players. But this line in particular, small bet, it's almost always weak from. Like small lead is almost always pretty weak. All right, 9-7 of clubs, 250, fourth position. I raise to 7. So again, first, second, and third fold. It's not like everyone's limping. Although there are hands like that. Cutoff, button, and big blind call. So a lot of people call. So flop, I get a open-ended straight draw. Big blind checks. I bet 16. And I'm okay with this size because notice if my opponents have a 10 or a draw or an 8, they're probably not folding to any reasonable bet. But if they don't have anything, they're probably going to fold. So I bet 16, only button calls. Turns an ace, again, very good card for me to bluff because if my opponent has a lot of 10s and 8s, maybe he'll fold at this point. I bet 36, opponent calls. So here's a good example of this again where now on the turn, it is way too likely whenever I bet this size, my opponent is probably sticking around. Either he has a very good draw or he has an ace, or he has like some random 10 or an ace that he's just never folding. So at that point, I decided he probably had a good hand, and I'm giving up. Also, live reads will help you with this too. I mean, if it becomes clear to you that the opponent's happy with his hand, don't bluff again, right? I mean, even though this ace is really good, if I had a read on my opponent that he did have a good hand, like say it was just clear to me he improved, I would just check. I would check and probably call a bet with the open-ended. Jared says, you have a gut shot. Well, I have an open-ended. 6 and a jack give me the nuts with 9-7. Well, jack doesn't give me the nuts, but it gives me the straight. So I'm okay betting here. If the turn was a spade, I would have definitely bet. I would definitely bet all the overcard turns just to give you some ideas. Anyways, river 4. This is a very bad river to bluff because if he does have an ace or a 10, he's probably, well, he may fold a 10, but I'm not going to count on it. If he does have a busted draw, that's just kind of unfortunate. I'm okay giving up here. So I check. He bets 70. Obviously, I fold. And he shows ace-8 for 2-pair, and this was not shocking to me. So I think a lot of the players in the games also got in their minds that they must bluff at every opportunity when they had a busted draw. Maybe not a lot of the players, but some of the more aggressive players. And it's okay to get out of the way. You do not have to bluff like a maniac. So I bet turn, opponent calls, and it seems pretty standard to me. This is a very standard bluff line that did not work, and all your bluffs will not work. Dave said, would you ever check raise if the river's a spade? No, definitely not. I'm just giving up. If I check and my opponent bets on a spade, I actually assume the opponent has a flush a ton. I think he'll probably check behind with ace-8 on the turn, on the river, if the river is, say, the 4 of spades. So I would definitely not check raise the river. I would for sure check fold. I'm not really trying to run bluffs to get opponents off likely strong ranges. I'm more so just trying to force the opponents off of most of their marginal hands. You'll find that trying to bluff, at least the players in my games, off of something like top pair is not a good idea. Roberts asks, is it easier or harder to play against a short stack knowing you have less fold equity? Well, you just have to play a range consisting of more value hands. All right, next hand. 8-7 offsuit in the cutoff. Second, third, low jack, I limp, and the blinds limp. Flop comes king 8-5. Second player bets 10. Third player folds. Low jack folds, and I just fold. So we talked about this a little bit earlier where I was just getting out of the way with stuff. And this seems like a pretty good spot just to fold. If the opponent has a king, I'm not in great shape. This is actually a little bit cleaner than the example I gave earlier with, I think I gave earlier 10-8 on jack 8-4 or something like that. Here, my 8 and my 7 probably are clean outs. But I also had to worry about the other players, the blinds, and they could easily have me in bad shape. So this is a spot where I think I have a very, very easy fold. I think calling would not be too bad. Notice here the stack size was 200. Maybe this was a different day at this point. I don't really know. But this is a spot where I think I do just need to fold. Bill asked, how do I get the video? So you should have the video on your end. If anyone has had a problem getting the video and knows the answer to get the video, please let me know so I can relay that to Bill and everyone else who may not have the video. But everyone has the video. It seems to be working for them. If you do not have it, I do not know what to tell you. But if anyone knows the quick fix for that, let me know. So anyways, yeah, this is just an example of where I got out of the way. Dave says you have to launch the application when you go to the webinar page. So give that a try. All right, pocket queens. We finally got a good hand on the button. Actually, you know what? If this is the second day, I just want to go through here and see if I had any good hands I played big pots with. So we had ace king and we lost. So yeah, so if this was still all the same day, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. No good hands so far. All right, pocket queens, $200 on the button. Low jack raises, cutoff calls. Oh, so I didn't write his amount. That's unfortunate. Let's assume 7. Because I don't think I'm raising to 25 unless he makes it 6 or 7. So low jack raises 7, cutoff calls. I raise to 25. Low jack calls, cutoff folds. So heads up. King 7-4, check, check. Turn 3, check, check. River 9, he checks. I bet 36. He calls, I win. So, why are we checking this flop? This is a spot where I think a lot of players just mindlessly bet. And I'm okay with betting, but I think checking is also great. Because you have to ask yourself, what bad cards can come for me on the turn? And the answer is only the ace, right? If the opponent does not have... I mean, the opponent, maybe he has something like pocket 8s and an 8 could beat me, or pocket 3s and a 3 could beat me. But if he does, I'll likely figure that out. I think my general plan when I check behind the flop is to call a turn bet if my opponent bets the turn and then fold to a river bet, or to check, check, turn, and if my opponent bets the river, to call the river bet. So that would be my general plan. If I had something like pocket 8s instead of pocket queens in this hand, even though I probably would have just called pre-flop with pocket 8s every time, but if I did raise with pocket 8s, I would almost certainly bet the flop, because then... Notice if my opponent has something like Queen Jack, he's just getting a free look to try to beat me. Whereas here, if he has something like Queen Jack, he has a free look to try to get a second best hand that I crush. So with pocket 8s, I have to protect against various overcards. With pocket queens, I don't. The only overcard I care about is an ace, and there just aren't that many spots like that. Rory says, are you entering listen-only mode? I mean, I don't know why you guys are not having video. It seems like the vast majority of the people have the video in this. You have to run some application. Someone says you might have a pop-up window under the browser and not see it. So maybe there's a pop-up window under the browser, something you're not seeing. But everyone has video. I do not know what to say. If you are having a problem with the video, just know I will be sending out a recording of this to you, so you'll be able to watch it again. Obviously, I know you'd rather do it live, but you'll get a video worst case scenario. But there's definitely a way for you to see the video. It's working for almost everyone. Richard says, are you taking notes on paper or using some kind of Word app on your phone? I'm taking notes on a piece of paper. I have a notepad I carry around, and I list this in the video. I believe it's in the bonus folder for this webinar, or you can get it at jonathanlittlepoker.com/notes. I explain all of that. David says, try clicking the flower button on the bottom if you see that. That might give you a better video. Christopher says, how do I determine 36 is the best bet size on the river? So, okay, so flop checks, turn checks. I think the opponent probably doesn't have much. So I cannot bet huge for value, right? Betting 52 would not make too much sense. Given the pot's, what is the pot? The pot's 60. So I'm betting an amount that is callable by a lot of marginal stuff. And you have to realize my opponent did not bet on the flop or the turn. Primarily the turn or the river, right? So he did not bet flop, turn, or river. So that tells me he almost certainly does not have a king. So I'm trying to now bet to get called by a few various ranges. If I think my opponent has exactly jacks or tens, I can probably bet a little bit larger, but I don't know that. He could also have random one pair hands like 9-8 or 8-7, and he's probably not going to call a big bet with those. He could have ace high. He's probably not going to call a big bet with those. So I need to bet on the small side. I could actually see betting a little bit smaller being better, maybe 26 instead of 36. And that's just because I am trying to get called by fairly weak hands, by most one pair hands. If I had to guess, I would say my opponent probably had something like 10-9 or ace-9 or something like that, but I don't know. I mean, he called and I showed my queens and he mucked, and that was the end of the hand. And notice that, say he does have something like ace-9 or 9-8. and I bet the flop, he's just going to fold, right? And those are hands that are drawing almost dead. So this is a really good spot to bet, or to check, and then bet the river. And, likely win the pot with no showdown. But if your opponent does call, you're almost always going to be happy with that. Donald said, please reiterate my line about if he bets the turn. So if he bets the turn, and I call, if he bets the river, I'm going to fold pretty much every time, because I assume that most of these players who are playing this tight, passive-ish strategy are only going to be betting the turn plus the river with a very good hand. And, that's a great spot for him to bluff me, and it would work against me, but my opponent likely does not know that. Steve says, it seems safer to bet the turn and then check behind on the river. It is, you say you're worried about giving free cards to a straight, but you have to realize this guy raises and then calls a re-raise. I mean, he probably does not have, first off, the straight draws, there are only 2 cards that are particularly bad, right? A 6 or a 5 are the only bad cards. And even then, when someone raises and then calls a re-raise, he probably doesn't have too many 6s or 5s in his range. I guess let's make this clear. So say it does check turn, and the river's a 6 or a 5. If he checks, I'm definitely checking behind. At that point, it is much more difficult to extract value. Or if I did bet, I'd probably bet something like 18. So a fairly small bet. But yeah, I mean, you have to realize, I'm not concerned with very many rivers. And you have to realize that those rivers don't necessarily beat you anyways. If the river was an ace, by the way, I would just check, and I would check river as well. So you don't have to constantly be betting. A lot of the players, like I said, were very concerned with the idea that they did not want to get outdrawn. And getting outdrawn is okay. You do not have to win every pot you play. Your main... Well, so you win at poker by 2 ways. One by getting value from your good hands, and the other is by making your opponents fold better hands than yours. And making your opponents fold when they have almost no equity is the exact opposite of how you win at poker. And I think that betting the turn probably results in that happening a pretty good amount of the time. Just because it's hard for the opponent to have a random 6 or a 5, and those are only gut shots, and I don't mind giving opponents draws to gut shots. What if the opponent led into me on the flop? It depends. I could easily see calling. It depends on how he led. If he led like $10, I would probably take the same call flop raise turn line as I did earlier with the bluff. If he bet something like 40, I would just fold. So that would probably be what I would do. If he bet normal, maybe 25, I would probably... that would be the toughest one to play against if he bet something like 25, because that's not like an obviously strong bet, but it's also not an obviously weak bet. So I would probably have to go with a read and call flop and see what develops, or just fold there as well. Andrew says, if he was to check raise me on the river, what would I do? I would fold. I would definitely fold if I get check raised at any point when I'm betting in this scenario. Earl asked the same question. If he check raises you on the river, what do? You fold. I would be flabbergasted if any of these players were check raising the river as a bluff. I don't know if I saw a single check raise on the river the whole time I played, actually. Like, if this guy had something like pocket 9s on the river, quite often he would just blast it. He would bet 80 because he was pissed that he wasn't getting any money in the pot. But yeah, I'm not paying off river check raises very often at all. And then Steve says, when they check to you on the turn, do you assume you have the best hand and can get value that you might not get on the river? I think any value I'm going to get on the turn, I would almost certainly get on the river as well. And it also just really makes it clear that I have the best hand, because if the opponent bets the river, I can easily call. So I induce some bluffs, and also I make my hand look much weaker. Frank says he never sees check raise bluffs at 1-2, and I completely agree. Thank you for taking the time to watch the preview of this course. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get this entire course for 80% off, well, I have my holiday sale for you. I have many of my absolute best products that have helped my students take their skills to the next level available for you at a fraction of their normal cost, about 80% off. As you see here, we have the Montreal Masterclass, where I go through one of my recent deep runs. I think I took 8th place out of 1,000 or so people in a World Poker Tour event. Also, we have my Bigger 109 first place review, where I won the Bigger 109 a while back. Also, we have my $1 Million Coaching Series, my Crushing Cash Game Series, and
my 1-2 live cash game webinar series, where I go through lots and lots of hands that I played at 1-2 no limit because, well, my students asked me to go through 1-2 no limit hands, to go there, actually play, put in the time to see what they are dealing with and show them how to actually crush those games, which fortunately I did. So definitely check those out if you want to take your tournament skills or your cash game skills to the next level. Also, I have pokercoaching.com. There I have over 650 interactive hand quizzes. If you've seen my podcast, Weekly Poker Hand, where I go through an interesting hand each week, well, this is relatively similar, except for instead of telling you what I do, I actually go through the hands street by street, and you have to tell me what you would do. And then I give you immediate feedback on your decision. Also, we have over 20 classes, kind of similar to the preview that you just watched, but a little bit more in depth on specific, concise topics. Also, 40 challenge webinars, where I put you in a scenario and ask you not how to play your hand, but how to play your entire range. And also over 30 coaching webinars that we have done with many other world-class pros who I have hand-selected to be poker coaching coaches. And also, every month we're adding new content. So if you are just part of pokercoaching.com, you get new, exciting content that you help me cultivate every single month because I let the students request things, right? If you tell me you want a course on, let's say, the individual chip model, right? Where we discuss how to play various stack sizes when they're payout implications. Well, if that's not already been covered, which it has, we'll make a video class on it, right? So that you can get exactly the education you need. Also, if you're a poker coaching member, we have a private Discord chat where you can ask questions. And also, we have backing opportunities. Every month, we put some of our students into live poker tournaments because I realize everyone doesn't have the bankroll to get in there and play $500 or $1,000 buy-in tournaments. And I want to help you all out. So every month we back a few people to give them a chance to succeed at live poker tournaments that may be bigger than they are bankrolled to play. So normal price for poker coaching for a 1-month subscription is $39, but for the holiday sale, I will give you the first month for only $9. It's not very much money, but that's okay. I don't mind because I know that if you become a poker coaching member, you will see immense improvements to your game relatively quickly. Also, I'm offering a 1, 2, or 3-year membership at a fraction of the cost. As you see, you can get 3 years for only $299, which is, goodness, a gigantic savings. So take advantage of that. And if you really want to take your game to the next level, I have Poker Coaching Premium. Here I have hired some of the absolute best players in the world who I want coaching me. I thought, who do I want coaching Jonathan Little? So I hired recently Michael Acevedo, who is the game theory expert. He just wrote a book, Modern Poker Theory, which is groundbreaking. Also, I thought, who are the most exploitative poker players in the world? And I hired Jonathan Jaffe recently, who, if you've never played with him, he is an absolute treat to play with, and he will put everyone in weird spots, and it seems like it just works out for him a lot. So I hired the world-class pros who have millions and millions of dollars in cashes to coach me to some extent, which in turn I'm using to help out all of my Poker Coaching Premium members. There, in addition to everything you get for poker coaching, you get even more quizzes. You get a whole lot more video classes on specific topics, over 110 at this point, and I'm adding new ones every single month. And also we have more and more exclusive webinars that are live and interactive, many of them are, with some of the best players in the world. So if you really want to take your skills to the next level, check out Poker Coaching Premium. That is part of the holiday sale at pokercoaching.com/holiday sale. Also, Poker Coaching Premium members get access to all of these courses that you see here. Over 65 of them. Again, whatever topics you want about poker, you will find. I have done my best over the last few years to cover every single aspect of No Limit Hold'em so that whatever you want to learn about the game, you can find at Poker Coaching Premium. Normally, Poker Coaching Premium is $99 a month, but we'll give you the first month for $49 with the holiday sale. And, you can cancel anytime, but it turns out Poker Coaching Premium members are not canceling because they are getting immense value from it. I've had players who started off just over the last few months breaking even at 1-2 no limit, and they're already progressing to 2-5 no limit, making $50 an hour. Some of the players who started playing at 2-5, they're already up to 5-10, making $100 an hour or more. because they have spent the time working hard on their skills using the materials that I have personally cultivated for all of you. I made Poker Coaching Premium to be the site that I wish I had when I started playing poker, and also the site I wish I had today, because really there's no other incredibly interactive site like this out there that continuously piles on value every single month. Also, if you want to get an annual membership, you can get that for half off, $649, which is a heck of a deal. If you plan on playing poker and you play more than like 1 to no limit or $50 buy-in tournaments, it's a no-brainer. It really is. I have been a member to many training sites. I have paid over $25,000 for private poker lessons, and I wish I actually spent more on that, because investing in yourself is one of the absolute best things you can do that will help you make more money long-term, which, money doesn't solve all your problems, but it sure makes them a whole lot easier. And once you become a great poker player where you can win $50 or $100 per hour, you're going to find then you can kind of do whatever you want in life. And I have the tools available for you to set you up for success. So check all this out right now at pokercoaching.com/holiday sale. Thanks for watching, and I hope the holidays treat you great.